Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to all of our attendees from all over the world. Really appreciate you all being here with us today. My name is Jared Molton. I will be hosting the webinar today with Marty Cagan. We are so excited to chat with Marty and hear a little bit more about his perspective on the intersection between AI and product management. And super excited to share all of these insights with all of you. So Marty is the co-founder of Silicon Valley Product Group and is a pioneer in the product management space. He's the author of three of the, I'd say, most influential, or some of the most influential books on product management: Inspired, Empowered, and Transformed. And we couldn't be more excited to have him here today. So thank you so much, Marty, for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, Jared. Good to be here.
The way that we'll do this today, Marty, is we have prepared a couple of questions to talk about product management in this new age of AI. Although I guess the age of AI is not as new as it feels like. And we can talk a little bit about that as well. We also, previously to the webinar, we asked folks who registered to share any questions that they had. We had hundreds of questions submitted. We consolidated a couple of them, and we'll get to them at the end. I will say that we are also monitoring the chat. So if anything comes up that we don't hit on, that we see a lot of traction in the chat, my team will let us know, and we'll make sure that we address those as well. So with that, let's get started with the conversation. Marty, I'd love to start with the basics. So how do you define product management, and why is a product manager essential to a technology organization?
Well, the truth is it's not essential to a lot of organizations. That's probably really important for people to understand, because AI is driving a lot of disruption in the industry. So, and I know you mentioned we've got people connecting from all over the planet. So it's important to look like beyond Silicon Valley, beyond just the US. But even in the US alone, or even in Silicon Valley, we have multiple models of product management out there. We have more generally, we have multiple models of how we build products out there. And we always have, honestly, when I say always, for more than 25 years, we have had three basic ways people build products out there in the world. And three different kinds of product managers for each of those three, one for each. And AI is having a very different impact on each of those three. And it ranges from your job is in serious trouble to you're making more money than you ever dreamed of. So it's not equally distributed. So that's kind of a complicated question, but it's an important one. So we should probably get it out on the table.
Well, I mean, let's start with what is a product manager, and then maybe we can talk about the three types.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what it gets to, because the three types exist because the roles and responsibilities is so different for each of the three models.
Sure.
So maybe let's get the one out of the way that sort of on its last breath right now. And that is, this is sort of referred to as the old software factory model. This is where there is basically all you really do is have developers coding, and then there is somebody to manage the backlog. This is the agile product owner. This is when the job is literally, of course, product owner is supposed to be a role on a team played usually by the product manager, but in a lot of the world in this third category, that's the job. They're just a product owner. Those people are in trouble. Agile's in trouble, as you might know. Now, there's some principles behind Agile, like if you go back to the manifesto, that are stronger than ever. And I ought to argue are really important to understand in the AI era. But in truth, in a lot of the world, especially in Europe, in a lot of Europe, the process people kind of took over Agile. And that whole thing, I've got a lot of friends over there. I spend a lot of time over there over the years, and I've been encouraging them to retrain as fast as humanly possible, because that job's got a big target on its back, and there are already major layoffs affecting that. So that's kind of the agile product owner. If you've heard of things like SAFe, stands for Scaled Agile Framework, but it's not agile in any sense, just marketing. It's not agile. So those people are in trouble.
What about the product managers that you said are going to make more money than they ever imagined?
Right. You want to cut to the chase and get to the big one. But so let's eliminate the product owner one. And now let's look at the two kinds of product managers out there, even though product owners fit in that bucket as well. But the product managers, there's feature team product managers and empowered team product managers. Also known as, there's the project model and the product model. So I'll just cut to the chase. The ones making all the money are the ones in the product model. And we'll talk about why. But the majority of companies, even in the US, the majority of companies are not running the product model. They're running the project model. Project model, just so everybody knows, it's described in the intro to the book Inspired. It's one of the most popular keynotes I've ever given. I gave it almost 20 years ago now, and it's still very popular. It's called Product Fail. Talks about the reason companies that even think they're agile are really not. They're all really waterfall. And basically a bunch of stakeholders and executives drive roadmaps. Those roadmaps are prioritized features and projects. And then eventually somebody with a title product manager has to gather the requirements and flesh it out, get it to a designer, get it to the engineers at sprint planning. We build, we test, we deploy, and it's output. It's all output. And that's why it's not a secret, the success rate of that model is, depending on what pundit you want to believe, about 15% of what you have on your roadmap actually delivers a business result. So that project model is, it's been around for so long because first of all, a lot of executives have never worked in the product model, but also because it's based on predictability, which is what makes a lot of people comfortable. So it's very much top-down command and control. That model is the reason AI hits product management in that job. And I know this is a little harsh, but it's not product management, it's project management. The product manager is really the project manager. And don't get me wrong, that's an important role. It's just not product management. So that job you can see it happening right now. Just follow on social media, because what a lot of people are doing, they're having a lot of fun with agentic AI. And what they're doing is they're automating their project management role. And what a lot of people are starting to realize is they're literally automating their replacement. So there's still a role, I believe, for a human element in the project management aspect, but not that much. And what it's really done is shine a light on how that's just not that valuable for a team. And here's what's going on. The AI has really reduced the cost of building dramatically. So it shines a light on, well, wait a minute. We're building faster than ever, but we're still not moving the needle any faster.
Yeah.
Now it's pretty clear the problem is not our engineers. The problem is supposedly, this is what our product managers are supposed to do. But the product manager is not actually helping on that, which is a long way of saying the third model, where the product manager is actually responsible for outcomes. And in order to do that, they are actually builders, not project managers. They are builders. They're building solutions, shaping solutions that deliver business results. That third model, which to be clear has been around forever, is just not well distributed. There's some companies famously were founded on that model, and they're the most valuable companies in the world today. And more companies. I was lucky. I got to learn that model. I got to work in that model, and you see the difference. That's the one that these people can't, companies can't hire them fast enough. Now, I still haven't really answered your question. So in that model, what does a product manager do? They build solutions, and they are personally, engineers build solutions, designers build solutions. The three of us are building solutions, but we're each responsible for different things. There's a lot of ways to frame what I'm about to say. Recently, I shared one that really seems to resonate with people. It was I first heard it from a friend of mine named Jeff Patton. You may have heard of. He wrote the book User Story Mapping. And the idea is that some of us build to learn, and some of us build to earn. Product managers and designers are all about building to learn. We are trying to figure out a solution worth building. The engineers are all about building to earn. So when you're trying to build to earn, you're trying to build something you can run a business on. Your customers can depend on. It's something that's reliable and performant and scalable and respects privacy laws and is accurate and fault tolerant. This is hard. And this is what Claude Code is helping with and Cursor's helping with, and it's never been better. On the other side, when we're trying to build to learn, which is also known as product discovery, what we're trying to do is figure out a solution that actually delivers a business result. So the project model, I said before, is basically a prioritized list of features and projects. That's all output, may or may not deliver a result. The product model is all based on outcomes. We're not given features and projects to build. We're given problems to solve. Those could be customer problems. Those could be our own business problems, or they can be both. And then we're given an outcome to achieve. You may recognize this. This is what an OKR was created for. The objective is the problem to solve, and the key results are the measure of success. And the product team's job is this is what it means to be an empowered product team, come up with a solution that actually delivers on those business results. Right. Which means now you need, your engineers know about engineering and your designers know about user experience, but who knows about the business constraints? Who knows about the customer purchase issues, the customer's business side? Who knows about what it takes to monetize this, to fund this, to service this? Who knows about how it's marketed, how it's sold? Who knows about the compliance issues, the legal issues, the regulatory issues? That is what the product manager brings to the table. Notice a product owner typically knows none of that. A feature team product manager typically knows none of that. So the product manager is bringing deep understanding of the customers, deep understanding of the data, deep understanding of the business to the product creation process. And so they're using that to shape. And of course, I'm sure we're going to talk about the AI has made this better than ever. But I will just point out, because it's important to realize that for more than a decade, product teams have been working this way of creating 20, 30, 50 prototypes per week, testing them in build to learn. And then once they have evidence that something's worth building, we can double click on that if you want. What are we looking for? But once we have evidence, then we build to earn. Then we build a commercial product. And that has never been faster than it is today.
I will say, so one of the things that you see is the way that prototyping has accelerated, right? With AI, it's just so much easier with all of these tools to build really good prototypes and get that feedback. The piece that I think is still really important that you mentioned is the outcomes orientation, where you shouldn't just be building prototypes to build prototypes. It shouldn't be like, oh, hey, let's go build this thing because it's cool. No, let's start from the end of this. And what is the metric that we want to move the needle on? What is the impact that we want to have? Okay, that's the problem we need to solve. Now let's go figure out what those potential solutions are, but let's make sure we're still oriented on that problem.
That's right. And as you're implying, working backwards has been one of the principles of outcome orientation of the product model forever. It's just one company's way of phrasing it.
Yeah. And it's a company and a vernacular I'm familiar with, which is probably why my orientation starts from there. We did talk a bit about product teams, and you mentioned, UX and product and engineering kind of working together. This has also been called the product trio. More and more you're hearing on LinkedIn that product managers are being asked to essentially do it all now because they have these AI tools. What's the implication of this on the product discovery process? And how do you recommend PMs navigate this new expectation?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, if you follow, it's very all over the place. So, for example, some people argue, no, it's the engineering tech lead should be doing it all, because they're, from that lens, they're right in the center. Here's the thing that's funny. And by the way, I've heard the same thing argued for designers too. No, right. The designers should do it all. They're the ones that have the holistic experience in mind. And some people absolutely, like you say, argue, well, wait, product manager could do it all. One of the things that is important to realize, we have always had unicorns. In the product world, I've always referred to them as triple threats. Triple threats. This is someone, they could be an engineer or designer or product manager by training, but it doesn't really matter what they started at. They're so good at all three. That's a triple threat. Triple threats are honestly quite rare. Somebody who's like a double threat is incredibly valuable, just any two of those. But I do know people that are triple threats in my book, and they're like as awesome as you're going to find. We have always had those people. Right now, there's a real temptation to think that's the future. I don't believe it. I wish, by the way, it could be, but I don't think it will be. And that's because those triple threats, what makes them so valuable is not that they know how to operate Claude code. Anybody can learn that. Yeah. It's that in their brain, they have learned what we call product sense. They have learned design sense. They have learned architecture. They've basically become experts at the judgment required for each of those three areas. And when you have someone like that, it's amazing because there's no handoffs. You just get these efficiencies. But on the other hand, it's not scalable. Most companies are doing really well when they have a skilled person on each of those three. And I think that's the much more scalable answer. It's not a question of could somebody operate these tools. It's a question of will that generate the results they need? And in my no, I don't think they will, not at scale. There will be outliers, and we should celebrate them, but they're outliers. What really matters is to be able to consistently deliver outcomes. Now, there are still big changes because 3 years ago, a typical team had about 8 people on it, like 5 engineers, a designer, a product manager, like that.
Yeah.
Today, 1 or 2 engineers, a designer and a product manager. The team size are going way down. Also, a lot of products today, a higher percentage than ever, products today are meant to be used programmatically primarily rather than through a user, human. Of course, agentic AI depends on this, but even before agentic AI, look at the rise of platforms. Look at the rise of Shopify, the rise of Stripe. These are amazing platform companies. Or how about AWS, one of my all-time favorite products in the world? That is, those are platform products. Those were designed to be used programmatically. And in those kind of products, the designer is often not in the mix. Some of the best companies do actually have an API designer, but most of them don't. So for those kind of products, it's often a platform product manager or a pretty technical product manager and an amazing engineering tech lead. And so I do think there are big changes to the shape, the topology of product teams.
How would you recommend somebody push back if their leadership is like, hey, it turns out it looks like you can do all of this now. So go ahead and do all of it. We're going to take your team away and we want to see you kind of take the reins and do UX and also do the engineering and learn code. How would you recommend they have that conversation? And like, what's the pushback there?
Well, there's really two things to be clear on. One is, should everybody on the team learn the new tools? Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I don't care who you are, the tools are amazing. They're amazing. And they have helped they have helped both build to earn. That's what everybody really talks about. But it's also dramatically helped build to learn. Like you said, the tools like Lovable out there to help us create prototypes that are not meant to ship to customers but are meant to learn. So the tools are better than ever. Anybody who is not learning these new tools, they're going to be obsolete very quickly if they're not already. So, and furthermore, there are agentic AI is letting us automate a lot of the repetitive tasks that all of us do some of, right? Yeah. Some of us, that's all we do every day. Other people, it's a percentage. It's a percentage of everybody's work essentially in a tech company. So you should absolutely be learning those things. Does that mean that you should play the role of a professional product designer or a professional product manager? If you don't have the skills, if you don't have the product sense, then you're going to lead that company to failure. So what really matters here is to frame this as we should try out all of these things. But what matters, our measure of success, is not did we ship this feature? It's did it move the needle? Did we achieve the outcome we need? And maybe it's worth pointing out, because if you just listen literally to the role of the product manager, it sounds like you do a little homework, you could be okay. But it's a lot harder than people realize. I know I'm preaching to the choir with you here, but it's a lot harder than people realize. First of all, when you're trying to shape a product, and I'm talking about a commercial product especially here, something that competes in the open market with never this many competitors as we're seeing now. So, right, the reduced cost has meant there's more players in virtually every category than ever before. When you're trying to do that, it's actually not enough to solve the problem. So, or some people like to phrase it as job to be done. It's not enough to do that job, because your customers have more choices than ever, including choices like build it themselves, or just continue to use Excel or whatever. They don't want to change. So it's not enough to solve the problem. You have to solve it in a way that's dramatically better than what else is out there. And that's the product manager on this product team. Everybody understands the engineers are responsible for at least the engineering, the feasibility. The designers are responsible at least for the usability of the solution. But the product manager is the one responsible for the viability, whether it works for our business, legal, marketing, sales, everything. But also, and the hardest of all, the value to the customer. And the value is what determines whether or not they actually choose to use your solution or buy your solution or switch to your solution. That's all value. And value is hard. It is a battlefield out there. So that's on the product manager. That's why I say, if you don't have these skills, if you don't have what we call product sense, well, realistically, what happens is you can't make any decisions, so you've got to escalate everything to your leaders.
Not the most ideal way to move quickly and to build value in a product org. So one of the things you mentioned there is differentiation. And we had a lot of questions come in from registrants about how differentiation is getting harder and harder in this world of AI, because it's so much easier to put stuff out there and you can get stuff out there so much quicker. And so how do you think about, or how would you motivate a product manager to think about differentiating their product such that it is delivering the outsized value that you just mentioned? Like, what are some of the maybe mental models you have for that?
Yeah. And I actually, the reason I love that question is because I think that's the right question ultimately for your industry, because the cost of delivery. In fact, let me frame it this way. Let's step back. There has always been three big challenges in product development. always. I mean, and I think there always will be. First is you have to decide what you're going to do, right? That's strategy. You have to, in the language of the product model, that is, you have to decide what are the most important problems to solve. That's your product strategy. Once you've decided those problems, you have to discover a solution that solves that problem better than the competitors. That's discovery. Once you've done that, you have some evidence that you've done that, then you need to build a product quality solution and get that out to your customers. That's product delivery. Product delivery is accelerating faster than it ever has. And that is been a major breakthrough. That's been the biggest breakthrough in the past 3 years of Gen AI. What does that mean? It shines a light on the other two areas. So now the real differentiation, when you can essentially copy anybody, anything, and essentially delivery is approaching a commodity. It's not there yet, but it is going in that direction where delivery is not the challenge. Then it becomes very clear that the two things that really matter to a company is, did you discover a truly better solution? And we can talk about what makes it better. And did you decide on the most important things to actually work on? In other words, the best opportunities or respond to the most serious threats. Did you do a good job on product strategy? So product discovery and product strategy are finally getting the attention, in my opinion, that they've always deserved. But honestly, when you go to a CEO and say you need to pay attention to that, and all they really see is that 90% of their cost is engineers and it takes forever to get anything built, they're like, don't bother me. We have to build. And now though, they're seeing that that's not the bottleneck anymore. It's not build. So they're realizing that, in fact, this is the thing that I find most frustrating out there, because I am a genuine believer in what Gen AI is able to do. But most people are wasting that amazing capability because all they're doing is turbocharging their feature factory.
Right.
All they're doing is garbage in, garbage out faster. So it's like, okay, what else? What other proof do you need that is not your issue? To me, it's become increasingly clear and obvious that the two things that are really distinguishing companies are strategy and discovery. And strategy is really the contribution of your product leaders, and discovery is the real contribution of your product managers, designers, working with engineers. So I actually see it as a golden era for product people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that strategy can be frightening to some PMs, right? As they're getting familiar with it and getting acquainted with it. It may take a little bit more of like a senior leadership position to kind of think about like, hey, this is the product vision. Let's execute towards this. Let's build a strategy that supports this product vision. I'm going to paraphrase this. You can let me know if I butcher it completely. But what I heard from you is that in this age of AI, that investment in product strategy, and I'm going to give an example that I think would make sense. So if your product vision is to be, I'll choose Udacity, to be the most personalized learning platform that exists. Let's say that's the product vision. The product strategy should then be, how do we bring that to life in every single interaction that we have with a customer to support that strategy? And then over time, what will essentially happen is we will have this incredibly personalized experience. And if a competitor comes in the door and tries to like figure it out or, replicate it through delivery, they're still not going to have that same level of depth and quality in everything that they've done. So it'll essentially just be a copycat that's not as good. And then quality ends up being the differentiator. Is that right? Did I get it wrong?
Not bad, but I did want to clarify one thing, because what you described as the vision of Udacity is actually the mission of Udacity.
Okay.
I mean, that was a perfect mission statement for it. And it's worth pointing out, lots of companies could have that exact mission. They probably do. Lots of people have that exact mission. There's nothing wrong with that. The real question, as you're getting at, is like, who delivers on that for real? That's the race. Now, so that's the mission. Okay. The vision is really, how are you going to do that? But in other words, over 5 to 10 years. It's like, how are you going to do that? In other words, what is, and you described actually some principles that are foundational to what Udacity believes as a good way to do that. So the product vision is the how we're going to actually do this, not engineering how, but like, okay, so how are you going to make your lives better? How are you going to make the student's life better? How are you going to make the creator's life better, or whatever? The product strategy is, okay, specifically this quarter, which problems do we need to solve?
Right.
So I'm just double clicking a little bit on what's underneath the mission. There is that vision. There is that strategy. You're right that a lot of product managers are really kind of freaked out by strategy, but I try to tell them, you don't need to. That's your product leader's job. What you need to get good at as a product manager is, once the leaders decide this is the most critical problem to solve this quarter, you need to work on this. You need to become great at solving that problem. And that's product discovery. Let's point that out. It means crafting a solution that, first of all, solves the problem, but also does it in a way that your customers value enough that they buy it. That means it's valuable, it's usable, it's feasible, and it's viable. That's the job of the product team, that triad you're describing. That is their job. It takes each of us, because we have different skills that we're bringing to the team. But that's what we need to get good at. And that is the build to learn.
Yeah, great clarification there. It makes a lot of sense. We're going to shift gears a little bit off of the tools themselves. One of the things that I have seen as a very important characteristic of a great product manager is the ability to make good data-backed, customer-backed decisions. How has that characteristic changed in this new era of AI, when we have more data than we've ever had in our lives? We have more ways of cutting the data. We have help in thinking about the data through these tools. What do you think about that, and how has that changed?
Well, what's changed is that now people realize that is actually the job of product. Because if you think about it, in the project model, where you're handed a roadmap of solutions, features and projects, or potential solutions, there's not much of that. The decisions have actually been made, usually by business stakeholders, sometimes by your CEO or executives, sometimes by high-paying customers, but somebody else is saying, build X. And so we're there to kind of deliver X. In a product model, no, we have to solve the problem. We don't know the right way to solve the problem yet. We have to determine the right way to solve that problem. And that means judgment. That's where we, like you said right at the beginning, we can do prototypes faster than ever, but how do we choose which prototype? What are we testing with a prototype? Well, the way we do that is, we know the outcome, we know the end that we're trying to do. We have lots of theories as to what could get us there. And our job in Build to Learn is to see which ones, and to do it really fast. So I was saying we could do 20 to 50 prototypes per week, even before Gen AI with Figma, for example. But with Gen AI, we can do not only better prototypes, but there's always been 4 kinds of prototypes. This is probably a level of detail most people don't care about, but there are 4 different kinds of prototypes for the kind of things you're learning. What's amazing about the Gen AI prototyping tools is that they let us take what used to be the most expensive kind of prototype and do them virtually free, as close to free as you can really get. And so we're able to do this discovery faster and more effectively than ever. You're also describing, it's not just building the prototype that's faster. It's also collecting quantitative feedback, qualitative feedback, the infrastructure for tests. All of the mechanics, the techniques are better as well, and getting better. The principles are the same. Principles are safe. For example, just to make this clear, in our taxonomy, there's 20 product first principles. These are things like, for example, one of those principles is if you want to innovate, you have to experiment. There's just no way around it. You have to experiment. The only question is how fast can you do it, but you have to do it. But another one of those principles is when you're building to learn, you have to be very sensitive, especially, I mean, if you're a brand new startup, you don't have anything to lose. You can just do whatever and nobody's going to sue you or whatever. There's nothing, no assets. But if you're an established company, if you're Udacity, so established company, and you decide to, yes, you need some real breakthroughs in some area, and you need to do big, bold experiments, not dumb little optimization tests like changing the color. I mean, big changes. Then you need to do that in a way that protects your customers, that protects Udacity's revenue, that protects Udacity's customer success teams, doesn't pull the rug out from under them. So we have a principle around doing these tests in a responsible way. So we have better techniques for that than ever before. Because you could, of course, just build it and throw it out there. But your poor customers, we call that customer abuse. It's like every week or every day, it's different, and I can't count on this anymore. And they don't even tell me. And it's just, it's like, I hate these people now. That's what customers say. And you can get away with that at times for brand new startup until you get really paying customers that are depending on you. And then you're in the big leagues and you have to actually do this more responsibly. So that's just an example of a principle that applies there.
Yeah, a couple that come to mind for me is, and these won't be novel to you, I'm sure, but the concept of one-way doors versus two-way doors. Yeah. That's a helpful decision-making framework. And, one of the things that I've also asked my teams to do over the years is let's just make sure we think through the pros and cons of every single product option. And some of those pros and cons may be a little bit more abstract. It may be, hey, is this going to cause a headline in the media that we don't want to have? And let's make sure that we build it in such a way that we're protecting ourselves from that headline, which is, I think, kind of the way that you just described it as well.
And the thing I'd love to call out is the most important thing. You called it out there. And this is what I try so hard with the companies I'm kind of helping through this change, is that you were encouraging your people to actually think. I mean, you can't say this enough because so many product people, they're literally not thinking. They think that their logic is you just follow a process. And that is not how product works. So while the tools are making us, we're able to collect data, we're able to run tests, we're able to analyze better than ever, the thinking is actually what the product manager brings to the table. And real thinking, and that requires a real foundation of product sense. You described, or you were implying, some techniques that I love. One of them is called a pre-mortem, to actually go through and see what could make this fail. These things in combination with the Gen AI tools, this is the golden era for product people. Where companies go in, or people especially get in trouble, is they abdicate that thinking to a tool or to a process. Unfortunately, you've probably heard this, but in a lot of big companies, the real problem is process is used as a substitute for thinking. This was another big Amazon principle, day one versus day two companies. And that's another way of capturing it. A day two company has been taken over by process. So super careful about that. It's all about that thinking. And the day that your thinking, isn't needed is the day you aren't needed.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to hammer home. And I'd say I also have seen folks using AI and LLMs to facilitate some of these decision makings and to put together the narrative. And in doing so, they do lose a little bit of their own perspective and point of view and thinking. And I actually think that point of view is really important because you are the person who's in the mix on this. There's the intangibles of product management, which is just the exposure to all of these things. And an LLM can't really replicate that yet.
This is the key. And in fact, the written narrative is such a good example because it's super easy to write a prompt to create a written narrative, which kind of misses the whole point. Because this is literally the definition of thinking. Exactly. And can you use Gen AI to create a better written narrative? Absolutely. But you don't want to abdicate. You want to amplify your thinking. You don't want to abdicate your thinking.
Yeah. We'll keep moving here. I'm having so much fun. So apologies to the audience if we're getting wrapped up on things. I think this is all really important. And so I'm trying to make sure that we spend the time on it when we need to. What are some of the most common mistakes you see from people trying to move into or grow into a product role?
Well, I mean, the biggest issue, and I have so much sympathy for an aspiring product person, because if you just go out there and start saying, I want to be a product manager, what does that mean? You could get totally different direction and advice. And for a long time, in fact, one of the problems with the language models, large language models, is you would ask it product questions and it would just be so random. And it took a while for us to really figure out what's going on. But it's, of course, trained on all these different opinions out there. So it's not a surprise that it wasn't consistent and wasn't always even making sense. What you realize is that there are multiple models out there, like I described. At least there are the two major models of the project model and the product model. If you tell the language model, oh, I'm interested, and I realize I just said model in two different ways, right? Language models are LLMs. Product models are these conceptual models for how we build products. And there's a project model and a product operating model. But if you tell the language model, I am trying to build in the product model, it will give you much better advice. And that's sort of this point. You need to know what kind of product manager you are trying to be. For example, there are courses online, major courses. Most of them are teaching you the project model. Now, they don't advertise that, because most of the time, the people that created those courses, they don't even know there is more than one model. They grew up writing PRDs and doing roadmaps, so they thought that's all there is. So you have to kind of know, and this is why I have so much sympathy. You kind of need to know what you don't know here, and a lot of it falls to the luck of the draw. Maybe you were lucky and you had a manager that was good and said, hey, what you really want is the product model, so learn this or whatever. But a lot of people have none of that, and they just are so confused. And it is very different to work in each model, completely different job.
How do you recommend somebody gets ramped up so if they want to become a product manager, they're starting from the product model?
Well, I'm a very biased person to ask, obviously. So,
is there a book on that?
There might be a book or three on exactly that. I still say the best way to really learn product is to work for someone who's been there, done that, done it really well, and is committed to helping you get better. I know. I mean, we were talking a little bit about Amazon. We both know the company well. There's other companies too. I have sent so many people to work for people I know at these companies, and within 6 months, they're like, "My life is so different. I have learned. I now know. I can now do the craft of product." At my last company, this was not product, and that was not what I signed up for. One of the sad things is those feature team product managers I was describing before, the project model ones, almost none of them like their job. It's a cat herder job. It's a project management job. It's not what they thought they were getting into. They wanted to shape products. They wanted to practice and learn how to be an entrepreneur and maybe go do a startup in the future. So when they get to actually experience what it's like at a good product company, it really changes their outlook on the entire industry and their job. So I like that. But again, I'm very biased. But yes, One of the things we ended up creating a few years ago, because people would be so frustrated. They're like, look, I've got these 3 different books and they're telling me completely different things. What in the world? So we wrote an article called Product Management Start Here. and the hopefully was that when people Google the title, they'll end up there maybe and get off on the right track. So you can sort of start building a mental model of how this works and get yourself trained up so that you can get one of these great jobs.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'd say the culture of the company is also very important. And if it's a culture that cares and nurtures the product model, you're also going to find a lot of incredible senior leaders at that company that are able to direct you and give you advice and help you navigate, your own journey and development as a product manager.
So, in fact, culture is really at the foundation of the product model, and it's ironic too, because the best product model companies, they believe in pushing decisions down to the teams because they're closest to the technology and closest to the customers. And the other companies, the project model companies, they believe that the decisions should all be made by the senior leaders, and it's top down.
Yeah. This one is personal for me. So I was able to transition into product management from a non-traditional background by getting a degree, getting an MBA. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how important a business education and an MBA might be for a prospective product manager.
Yeah. That's always been a very religious topic in our industry, because a lot of the most famous sort of CEOs that are real, like engineer CEO leaders of major companies, they kind of were sour on MBA students, mostly because they didn't feel like they were being taught the things that they needed to learn. And that it is true that sometimes, even especially from the top programs, they kind of think they got this degree so they could be the boss of everybody. And so that really rubbed people the wrong way. And, but honestly, I've never been in that camp. So I have found that, many of the best product people in the world got that MBA as their foundation. So there's really, there's 2 things. There's the skills you learn and your mindset. You can very quickly, even in the onboarding process, you can help people reset any sort of bad impressions they might have about, like, what are you really doing on the team? And so I think that is very easily corrected. For many years, and by the way, Google they were one of the companies that didn't really like MBAs.
Yeah.
But funny enough, for decades, literally for 2 decades, when they would recruit product managers, they wanted you to convince them in the interview that you had already learned at least 2 of the disciplines of a tech product company. Show me that you've learned engineering and marketing, or show me that you've learned sales and data. Just show me that you've learned at least 2. And their logic was, hey, if they can learn 2, they can learn the rest. And of course, if they were more open to MBAs, they would have easily found people that had more of that breadth. So I don't think they're as incompatible as people think. It is true that, honestly, this has always been a source of frustration to me, but universities just have been on the back end of all this in the product world. They have some faculty, but they usually come from the marketing discipline. So this is like Procter and Gamble style, product. And so it wasn't so relevant. And most companies, you really learn the craft of product once you get to the company.
Yeah, and every company does it differently as well, and so you kind of learn how that company does it when you get there. Certainly, for me, I can tell you the background in education, I think, expedited my ability to kind of understand the outcomes-driven product management approach, where instead of marching towards just building a feature, it was like, okay, why are we doing this? What are we driving? What's the goal of this? How is it going to move the needle for the business? Because at the end of the day, we are all here to drive the business forward.
but also you knew, I mean, this is, I'm giving you anybody that does an MBA, I don't care what program it is, they at least are exposed to enough to know there are all these dimensions of a business. Yeah. It's not just code it, ship it. It's like there are compliance issues, there's regulatory, there's security, there's the whole go-to-market path. This is hard. And if you don't even know it exists, and by the way, I was one of those, I didn't have an MBA. I was an engineer that wanted to learn product. And it was only the first person that took the time to coach me that opened my eyes to how clueless I was about how a business really worked. Now, what saved me is I had someone who was willing to teach me. But one way or another, you need to develop that business savvy.
Yeah. And I think that's just, again, it comes down to exposure. Curiosity is really important, right? Asking the right questions, trying to understand what the intentions are of the different business units and how they all work together. We only have 10 minutes left, believe it or not. We have a question that came in from the audience that I want to make sure I hit on.
Go for it.
In the AI era, what are the 3 specific practices, tools, or process changes that you would recommend a product manager adopt, either in their daily work or across the product development cycle? So there's a lot there.
It's hard. Well, if you're, again, the big caveat of everything I say is if you want to work in the product model, if you want to work at a product model company like Amazon or Netflix or Google or Apple, if you want to work at a company like that, then what you want to do is really build to learn. You want to learn the skills and the techniques of build to learn. And that's 2 things, really. First of all, the easy stuff, the tools and the techniques are easy to learn and they're fun. So you've probably heard this, but in a lot of these companies, if you go to an interview, the first thing they do is they give you a problem to solve. And then they say, show me what tool are you going to use to prototype this? How are you going to test it? So you better have a good answer to that. And that's actually some people think that's like, well, that's not the job. That is the job. So they're asking a very good question and you should get good at that. So learn the skills and techniques of build to learn, which is prototyping, testing those prototypes, and the various techniques we have to line up users, to test qualitatively, to test quantitatively. It's fun. That's literally what the book Inspired was written for. So, and it's ironic, but Inspired has never been more relevant than it is today because AI has made it more obvious that people need these skills. The other half and the harder part is developing product sense. This is really the table stakes. This is what makes you useful to the product team. Everybody on the team should know the skills and the techniques, but your contribution is based on that product sense. And that's spending time with the customer, the data, the different stakeholders and what their constraints are. So you have to learn these things so that you're bringing this real knowledge to the table, your industry, your competitive landscape. You have to know that. I will say also the language models, if you configure them correctly, are a really good personal coach to learn product sense. And we've been writing about that lately because it's a game changer for people that are serious about learning product, not serious about learning how to write a prompt to generate a PRD, which takes 5 minutes and is not useful. But right. I mean, serious about developing this knowledge that makes you a valuable member of a product team.
Where can listeners find out more about the AI coaching that you're chatting about here?
And maybe one of your people can share in the chat, but it's on svpg.com. There's a whole big articles archive, and one of the more recent one is called I think it's like AI product coach. Product coach, yeah.
So
you and I, Jared, we should acknowledge just how lucky we are. We each learned product in great product companies from some great leaders.
Yeah.
The sad part is most people don't have that. So how are they supposed to learn? If their company is enlightened enough to get them a personal product coach that knows this, awesome, but most don't. So then how do you learn? I think the real breakthrough is using AI as that product coach. And if you read the article, it'll tell you how to configure this stuff. And what's amazing to me is that all you need is an internet connection and a device, a phone, a laptop, whatever. You can be anywhere in the world, and you can get access to this 7x24 product coaching, no extra money. It's a game changer for people.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, even for me, somebody who's done this for, a decade plus, going back and getting that feedback is always helpful. To me, it's a journey that never ends. So it's something that, if that tool is available, and, it sounds like you guys have done some good thinking on it, definitely worth checking out. I have two more questions that I want to get through before we close this. So the first one, maybe we can try to do kind of pretty quick here, just to be respectful of time. You talked about how important it is to learn these tools. In Inspired, you talk about how a product manager's job is already like 60 hours a week. So they're doing product discovery, they're doing customer interviews are certainly part of that. They're doing delivery, they're doing all of these other things. They have to work with the different stakeholders and make sure that they're, on track and doing the right things and aligned with the business. How does somebody find the time to learn this stuff while doing everything else? And what advice would you give to somebody who's like, I got no time left, Marty. I don't know when I'm going to have the time to learn this stuff. We know it's so important, but how do you make the time for it?
Yeah. Well, this is a real thing, not just product managers. Engineers, are more, even the ones that are most excited about the technology are reporting they're getting fried. They're just, their brain's ready to explode. So I understand this. I do want to clarify the reason it was 60 hours a week is because so many product managers are trying to be both the product manager and the project manager.
Yeah.
And these are the ones that are, if your day is wall to wall booked with meetings, it's a pretty good sign you're trying to play project manager. Because the actual build to learn is not a meeting thing. There's occasional meetings, of course, but it's not. It's a lot more like an engineer or designer where your head's down and you're really thinking through what's going on. So, but what happens is so many companies, the person is also trying to do the project management. And so what do they end up doing? They do their meetings, which they have to schedule during the workday. And then in the evenings, they're trying to get their real job done. And it's very frustrating. It always has been frustrating. So I try to tell people, offload the project management. Yeah. So that is not what's going to make you successful or not. It's the product management that's going to make you successful. So, because I do think, it is much more doable job. And life, you can have a life. Now, part of what you're describing, though, is culture. So in certain companies, let's just say they're not optimized for you to have a life. And this is a real problem in Silicon Valley. As you know, it can be a problem in Seattle, too. It's a difficult one. And that's not really about job definition. That's more of a cultural thing. And I do draw a real distinction here because I don't want to be hypocritical. I've spent most of my career working these crazy hours. But I will say there's a very big difference between working like that because you want to and you're doing something amazing and you've never had so much fun in your life, and you're doing that because you'll be fired if you don't. Yeah. Completely different. So
good way to put it.
I don't think anybody should, one blanket rule, because I would never want to give back the most fun I've ever had. On the other hand, like there was one company I worked for where it was just 7 days a week, non-optional. And that was definitely not fun.
I'd say that the other thing about this that at least for me has been effective is that learning this stuff is fun. Like it is fun to sit down in Claude Code and try to figure this thing out. And so I don't view that, at least for me, as, part of my workday. But after hours, rather than reading a book, I may say, you know what, I'm going to sit down and learn this thing because this is really cool. And it's not just going to help me with my life and my career, but it's also, I'm curious and interested in it.
Yeah. We should acknowledge, Jared, I have been doing this so long. I've been through a lot of these technology changes. I was at Netscape when the internet came out. It was another one of those. Everything changed. What's different about Gen AI is that it continues to disrupt and change.
Yeah.
So I think humans were okay at like every few years having a big learning bump. The question is, is this the new normal? And I don't know the answer to that. I kind of hope it's not the new normal, because I think humans, it takes hundreds of thousands of years for our brains to really evolve. I don't think we're really cut out for that. But, we do fine when it's in these bursts. If it's going to be a sustained thing, we're going to have to come up with ways to maintain our sanity and our motivation over the long run, because you're, like you said, you're willing to put some time in an evening to learn something and it's fun. But if that's every evening for the rest of your life, I don't know. That's a different situation, right? So
I did want to read War and Peace at some point in my life.
There is this notion of a family you might actually discover at some point. So, this is an open question. For the promise, of course, is that we'll have more time, not less, but so often it doesn't work out that way. We'll have to see.
It's a really interesting time to be alive. It's a really interesting time to be a product manager, and a really interesting time to be in tech. So, Marty, thank you for sharing all of your insights and wisdom with us today. We are at the hour. Appreciate you joining us. Appreciate all of the people around the world joining us. I had a lot of fun. Thank you. We will be sending this out as a recording, so folks can always come back to it and review then. But thank you again, and hope to talk soon.
Thanks, Jared. I appreciate it. It was a great discussion. I loved it.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.